So this video will cover the overview of the functions of the nephrons and the collecting duct. So make sure you focus on the major functions of each region in the nephron. So what you're looking at is a part of the kidney. This is the cortex and this is the medulla, which is the middle region. This is the renal papilla, where all the collecting ducts basically empty into a larger papillary duct before emptying the urine into the calyces of the renal pelvis. Okay, so this picture has been put over here to show you two different types of nephron. There are cortical nephrons and there are juxtamedullary nephrons. Okay, nephrons are the major functional unit of the kidney, and this is where all the absorption, reabsorption, and secretion occurs to make urine. Now there are about 1 million nephron in each kidney, and this portion over here is the renal corpuscle, and the remaining portion over here, these long tubules, are called renal tubules collectively. And there are three major sections in each renal tubule. You have the proximal convoluted tubule, which is all this region is the proximal convoluted tubule because it is closer to the glomerulus. And this over here is the loop of Henle. And this again is the loop of Henle. And the loop of Henle has a descending loop that goes down and the ascending loop that goes up. And this area away from the glomerulus, so further into the renal tubule, this is called the distal convoluted tubule. Okay, so and this cup-shaped structure is the glomerular capsule. So there are two types of nephrons. The first one that you see over here is the cortical nephron, and the second one is the juxtamedullary nephron. 85% of the nephrons in the kidney are made up by the cortical nephron. Now the difference in the cortical and juxtamedullary nephron is that the cortical nephrons have their glomeruli in the outer cortex, and they have shorter loop of Henle that only dip just about closer to the outer medulla, whereas juxtamedullary nephrons, the loop of Henle is a lot longer and they almost reach the renal papilla. So they are present a lot deeper into the medulla of the kidney. Now, the importance of juxtamedullary nephron is that unlike these cortical nephrons that are just superficially located, the juxtamedullary nephrons contribute largely to the osmotic gradient of the medulla. So since they have a really long loop of Henle, they enable the kidneys to conserve a lot of water and secrete hypertonic urine. Okay, so that's why the juxtamedullary nephrons are important. They play a major role in conservation of water and maintaining the osmotic gradient of the medulla. So this is an oversimplified image of the nephron. The first part of the nephron is the Bowman's capsule and the renal corpuscle. And the second part is the proximal convoluted tubule. The third part is the loop of Henle, the ascending and descending loop. And then you have the distal tubule and the collecting duct. So we're just going to quickly review the major functions of each section. So the renal corpuscle is composed of the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule, also known as the glomerular capsule. So the main function of the renal corpuscle is to filter water and dissolved substances in the plasma. And so mainly the glomerulus does this part, and the major function of the glomerular capsule is to receive the filtrate. That is it. So its main job is to receive the glomerular filtrate. So the second section is the proximal convoluted tubule. Its main job is to perform selective reabsorption of substances. So it reabsorbs things like glucose and amino acids. And then you have creatine, in general acids and ions. And acids and ions are reabsorbed by a process known as active transport. So uh, sodium ions are the most abundant cations. They're positively charged ions in the filtrate. So nearly about 80% of the energy used for active transport is involved in reabsorption of sodium ions alone. The other substances that are reabsorbed in this area are water. So if you remember, water is reabsorbed mainly by osmosis. If you remember this from the 137 chapter 3, we talked about osmosis. And the other substances that are reabsorbed mainly include chloride ions. So chloride is negatively charged. And in general, there are a lot other negatively charged ions that are reabsorbed in the proximal convoluted tubule, mainly by electrochemical attraction. Because, when sodium ions are reabsorbed by active transport, there's a positive charge that goes in to the bloodstream in the peritubular capillaries, and the negative charges like chloride just follow due to electrochemical attraction. And in this area, there's some amount of secretion also occurs. So by now you should understand that reabsorption means reabsorption back into the peritubular capillaries, back into the bloodstream. When I say secretion, it means being secreted back into the filtrate to be excreted as urine. So this is a list of things that are reabsorbed. So this is called selective reabsorption. Some amount of things are also secreted back into the filtrate, mainly drugs like penicillin and histamine that is responsible for allergic reactions. Creatinine is also secreted into the urine, and mainly ions like hydrogen ions are secreted by the urine into the filtrate just to maintain homeostasis and pH in the blood. Now moving on to the next region, loop of Henle. Loop of Henle is very important in maintaining osmolarity. The descending loop that goes down, this is called the descending loop. The main function of the descending loop is to reabsorb water. Reabsorption. Okay, and the main function of the ascending limb is to reabsorb sodium ions and potassium ions and chloride ions. Okay, so the descending loop is highly permeable to water, whereas the ascending limb is highly permeable to ions like sodium, potassium, and chloride. The functions of the descending convoluted tubule is very similar to the functions of proximal convoluted tubule, except for the proximal convoluted tubule is where most of the reabsorption occurs, okay? But distal tubule reabsorbs whatever little that is remaining and is essential. For example, in the the distal convoluted tubule reabsorb what is remaining in the filtrate, right? So anything important like sodium, if there's more sodium that needs to be reabsorbed, it's reabsorbed by the distal tubule. So sodium. And again, sodium is always reabsorbed by the process of active transport. Active transport requires energy, right? So the other thing that is reabsorbed in the distal tubule is more water, reabsorbed. And then you have a lot of secretion occurring. So at this point, the receptors that evaluate the filtrate and the bloodstream to see what needs to be secreted and what more needs to be reabsorbed. So the main job of the distal tubule is to secrete more hydrogen ions and more potassium ions by electrochemical attraction. Okay, so the next region is the collecting duct. Collecting ducts main job. Now, there are other hormones that affect the process of reabsorption of substances, correct? And collecting duct's main job otherwise is to perform reabsorption of water. Okay, so its main job is to retain water and retain water in the body that eventually affects the blood pressure. Now, if you look at all these different regions of the nephron, most reabsorption occurs in the proximal tubule of the nephron. Okay, some amount of reabsorption occurs in the distal tubule, but most of it takes place in the proximal tubule. Let's quickly look at the flow of filtrate and urine through the nephron and through the urinary system in general. So the first step is that the filtrate is squeezed through the glomerulus and the filtrate is forced into the capsular space in the glomerular capsule. From the capsular space, the filtrate passes through the proximal convoluted tubule, and from the proximal convoluted tubule, the filtrate goes to the descending loop of the loop of Henle, and then it goes to the ascending loop of the loop of Henle. From the ascending loop, the filtrate enters the collecting duct. Okay, until the collecting duct, the stuff is called a filtrate. But when the filtrate leaves the collecting duct, it can be called urine. And so at the renal papilla, so this area is the renal papilla. At the renal papilla, and this picture is right over here. At the renal papilla, several different collecting ducts combine to form a larger papillary duct. Okay, so now the filtrate is called urine. From the renal papilla, the urine enters the what is that called? The minor calyx. And from the minor calyx, it goes to the major calyx. And this area is the renal pelvis, right? So this over here is the renal pelvis, this whole area. So from the major calyx, urine enters the renal pelvis. From the renal pelvis, the urine enters the ureter. From the ureter, it goes down into the urinary bladder. And from the urinary bladder, urine exits the body as urine.